regulatory issues generally for any kind of project. Whether it's blockchain or not, there are certain things that always come up that you always need to consider. But they have a twist, as always, in the Web3 world. So what about privacy? Insurance, how does that work? It has been very difficult in the past for Web3 projects to even get insurance. To DAO or not to DAO, that is the question. We talked a little bit about this yesterday in another session, which is, a decentralized autonomous organization will bring up certain issues from a legal perspective that you don't see with other types of communities coming together. And it also makes it interesting sometimes for the real world to interact with the Web3 world. Other things we think about, copyleft versus copyright. And this goes down to questions about just some of the fundamental principles we think about when coding, actually, when developing software in Web3, because there is an open source ethos there, again, that is not necessarily prevalent in other industries. Tokens. This is actually an old meme that we've had. This is not the first time Angie and I have done this presentation together, by the way. So this is actually a meme from about 2 years ago, but we've kept it in because it seems even more appropriate these days. And that is to think about tokens and how those are being used in different ways throughout the world. And I think we can all agree since January of this year, we've seen maybe some meme coins we didn't expect to see, and also stable coins we did not expect to see. And then I find your lack of jurisdiction disturbing. That, I think, is something that you hear regulators say quite a bit when looking at Web3 projects and trying to understand how is jurisdiction established. So these are some of the concepts that we are going to bring forward during this presentation. And we always put on our explorer hats, right? Yeah. We definitely think of ourselves in Web3 as exploring a new frontier of law and regulation. And that's actually what drew me to this industry many years ago now. And Web3, we won't go through this in detail, but this was on the Polkadot wiki when I first joined. And I think it's a wonderful summary of some of again, those fundamental philosophies that underpin what we're doing and what we're striving to put in place, not only from a legal and regulatory perspective, but in everything that we do, particularly within Polkadot. But this is really from a Web3 perspective. Angie, do you want to?
This was one of the quotes at Decoded that really struck me and Chrissy. We decided to put it up because Gav drew this on a piece of toilet paper, and then went up to present it, and it was so moving because it encapsulates, I think, the ethos of Web3 and specifically of Polkadot in terms of the purity that we approach everything, and the idea that we look for discovery, and we look for discovery through others' eyes to really see the truth of what is happening here.
And then this is my personal meme that I've added, which is, this is what I like to think I looked like going into Web3 and dealing with the legal issues, and that's what I feel like now, 3 years later. And I'm sure there are other Web3 lawyers, regulators, and just general people watching the market who probably feel similarly. It's important to laugh. Now, we've been through some of these dry topics. Maybe your eyes are starting to glaze over. So we thought, let's contextualize. And this is something that we tell founders all the time. And I think this is where, Angie is a founder herself, an entrepreneur. I'm helping guide founders a lot of times within the Polkadot ecosystem to encourage them that when they set up their projects initially, that it's done in such a way that they're anticipating issues that might come down the road. So if you get ahead of these legal and regulatory points, if you're being careful, if you're being compliant, if you're raising issues where maybe you can't be compliant because there's nothing analogous, right? You can't get that functional equivalency or regulatory equivalency that Primavera was referring to yesterday, that you're bringing these issues up with the relevant counterparties so you can problem solve together. So, this is part of adulting, as we all know, and it's not always fun, but it's important to get right. So, a way to help founders in particular, again, contextualize what they need to do, we decided that we would equate it to something similar to a healthy diet that you would employ on a day-to-day basis when you're thinking about what you actually put into your body. So you need a healthy diet, although I know there's some debate on this at the moment within the scientific community, but let's go with this because I think a lot of people think about how they eat this way. So your decisions matter, what you eat, basically, and you need to be mindful. And things like your gender, your age, your height, your weight, your ethnicity, whether you're active or sedentary, your goals, all of these things are what we as individuals would take into account when we come up with a healthy diet for ourselves and how we live our lives. Similarly, when you're putting together a healthy diet for your company, focusing on legal and regulatory issues, you need to think about, let's call them the 5 food groups, right? Similar to what we had before, which is dairy, vegetables, fruits, grains, and protein. We now have structural, regulatory, staffing, intellectual property, and data. And this is how we tell founders to think about legal and regulatory issues when they're setting up their companies. Similar to the questions that we asked to put together your healthy eating plan, there are questions that you need to look at when you're putting together a plan for a business. Or if you're looking at this from a legal regulatory policymaker perspective, I think these are important to think about and the context of the individuals who you want to encourage to be entrepreneurial, to build in your jurisdiction, to employ people where you are based. These are the things they should be thinking about as well, because these are pretty essential. I won't go through all of these in detail, but you can see, what is your purpose? Where are you going to be located? Where are you going to have bricks and mortar, or are you not going to have bricks and mortar? Are you going to have consultants or employees? Who are you trying to serve? What is your use case? And how? How will you do it? How will you pay people? Is it going to be on-chain, off-chain? These are all things that, really practical stuff, which might not be fun to answer always, but are very important. So we tried to put together, underneath, again, those 5 groups, some of the things that come up in Web3 that people need to consider. So under structural, as you'll see, we've talked about companies and DAOs, tax, obviously. Under regulatory, very important to think about that in the context of marketing and communication, which Angie is going to give us some really good case studies about coming up. Also horizon scanning. That's absolutely essential in the Web3 space to know what's happening around the world from a regulatory perspective. Staffing. In the Web3 world, there are a lot of digital nomads, and people have a lot of flexibility. Also, it's a remote-first environment. And so how do we engage people in order to deliver the work that they need to deliver for us? How do they use AI? Intellectual property, we've talked about. Trademark obviously comes up quite a bit. Domain names, and then data. That is obviously a very important point, whether you're talking about privacy or privacy, depending upon our audience, or non-disclosure agreements, zero knowledge proof. There are a number of things. We were talking about Tornado Cash yesterday. There are, again, some real life examples that if you know the legal and regulatory landscape when you're setting up your project, again, you can address particular concerns that might come up early, and you can work with policymakers to put in place things that make sense. So, we're all building something incredible together. I always like to say it's not just the developers, although they are obviously very important and it is their intellectual property. But as people who are interested in policy making in the legal and regulatory environment, we're building as well. And again, that's what attracted me to this industry in the first place, is the ability to be able to build something new and exciting that it's a new digital world. And again, I mean, we've talked about Daphne, she's here. It's the world we're building for her, and I never want to lose sight of that. So we've taken you through the legal and regulatory diet, and you might be glazing over again. So I'm going to turn it over to Angie to take us through some real life examples of what we've experienced.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chrissy. A lot of what Chrissy and I talk about is making these kind of checklists so that developers can develop, focus on building, and also have these things in the back of your mind. So I'll just take you through the token launch because I think it's a great story and it's part of the Polkadot history that's important, I think, for people to understand. So we went through a 3-year process with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, in the U.S. In the fall of 2019, the SEC said, come in and talk to us. And at the time, I remember we thought everyone would rush in to talk to the SEC because, you know, I have, as I mentioned earlier, 20-year background in traditional finance, and I have worked in capital markets and taking companies public, and typically when the SEC says come in and talk to us, everyone rushes to get in line. It turns out we were really the only ones that rushed in to get in line. So, you know, and there was some controversy even a year and a half ago as to whether or not this, you know, form at the SEC was real, and it's actually real. There's just a little tiny form on the website. They said fill out the form, and we filled it out, and about a week later we were in DC. I'll give you the conclusion first, and then we'll go through the steps. But the conclusion was that we published a statement in November 9th of 2022, which said that we had achieved something that no other blockchain network had achieved, which is that the Polkadot native digital asset, the DOT token, had morphed, and it was no longer a security, it was simply software. So I'll go through what happened here. So call out Benjamin Franklin here. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. Most token launches did not have 6 months of preparation. We took this very seriously. The founders, the Web3 Foundation management, Parity management, it was an all hands on deck community. We really took it seriously. And we, 6 months later, started the process on May 26, 2020 with the proof of authority. And that was when users came and claimed their tokens. And we did something that no one else had done prior to this, which was we matched identities and made sure that the original purchasers of the private token, so it's very typical, and you probably have heard of this, there are purchasers in the private market before the token starts trading. So we made sure that the purchasers of the private in the private market were the same purchasers we were delivering the DOT token to. So once we had that established and all of the participants had claimed their tokens, the decentralized treasury was established. That was a groundbreaking moment according to the SEC. When we presented the decentralized treasury to the SEC, they said no one has ever done anything like this. A truly decentralized treasury in which because there were already DAOs at the time. In fact, the DAO report had already come out and said that the DAO token in the DAO report was a security. And that's because there were a small number of people who were managing the token, almost like managing a bank account. Whereas in Polkadot's case, the Web3 Foundation turned the token over to the treasury so that the community could manage that token. So it was a truly decentralized DAO, which still exists today. And the pseudo key was removed in July 2020. And that's considered the moment of decentralization from a regulatory perspective. Then we did a Regulation S offering, which is, Regulation S, when you hear Regulation D, Regulation S, these are exemptions from registration, which means that if you file an exemption from registration, so a Regulation D exemption or a Regulation S exemption, that means that you're exempt from registering what you have as a security. However, you are also admitting that it is a security. A Regulation S needs to go through the SEC. We had to meet with the SEC, negotiate, put together an offering memorandum, just like an offering memorandum would have existed in traditional finance. So this was the first of its kind, and to our knowledge, there has never been another Regulation S since. The key component to Regulation S is that it has to happen outside the United States. And we took great pains to make sure that all of the recipients of the token were outside the US and that communications were not made in public places like Twitter, because all social media is considered in the US because it's publicly available. So I'll go into that in a minute. But then August 18th, 2020, the DOT was delivered as a security. This was also a first in the market. We delivered it as a security because when it was issued in the private markets, it was issued as a security. And there was an interpretation and guidance that we had from the SEC that if you issue a token in private markets, when you deliver it in public markets, it's still a security. It's still a security until it is fully decentralized. And if you think about decentralization and you think about a project, a developer, let's say one of you starts a project, it's you, it's maybe a few other developers, it's a handful of people typically that can control the project, right? So the goal in decentralization is to expand that control beyond the founders. And so it's logical that when a token is launched and it's a small group of people who control it, it's still a security. It hasn't decentralized. So the reason it took until November of 2022 to announce that DOT was no longer a security is because it took that long to make sure that the DOT token was fully decentralized and to make sure that things like the affiliates rule were not broken. So if you think about parity, Web3 Foundation, maybe some of the founders, the holdings of all of those entities and the agreements between them had to be separated enough that they weren't considered control entities where one controlled the other, and this was a common enterprise. So we went through, in painstaking detail, every single point in the white paper. We put it in a checklist that was 3 pages long, and we went through and made sure every single thing in the white paper was delivered. And in November 2022, which was a three-year anniversary actually, that's when we decided that DOT was no longer a security. Now I want to go back to the Regulation S because this is something that you'll hear people say that they did Regulation S-like, or they did a launch that was like one outside the US, but this is the only one we know of that actually happened. There was only one launch message which came from Gav, and this was it. And if we used geofencing, we had KYC AML in place, we had locks on the DOT, by 60-day lock, which we negotiated with the SEC. We had internal controls, we had staff training. We treated this like a public offering that would happen in traditional markets because we wanted to be as conservative as possible. The reason was not to be a hero on the regulatory side. It wasn't to break ground, any kind of ground. We were thinking that everybody was going to do this. It was just to get the technology out there. The technology was so important that Gav and the founders felt we will do anything to make sure that we check these boxes so that we can get this technology out there and so it will be long-lasting and resilient. We didn't do any AMAs, we didn't do any tweets, no retweets, no panels, no press interviews, no responses to press, no other public communications. There was nothing. There was one article speculating that Polkadot had launched, and that was it. So just, one thing when you're, you're in the market and you hear things about Polkadot, you might hear some venture capital firms say things like, we don't really hear much about Polkadot. Or is Polkadot, what's really happening with Polkadot? I hear that in the US. A lot of this stems back to that Regulation S when US investors were excluded. And that is, that was maybe a consequence, unintended consequence, not sure, but that's part of it. Our response to this is always follow the developers. So the reason I'm here right now and took, time out from my busy life in .play to come to Switzerland is because follow the developers has always been our mantra in investing. Follow the developers is the reason I got involved in Polkadot in 2019 after meeting Gav and understanding all the great care that was going into creating the most resilient technology network. 5 years later, my conviction is even higher. So follow the developers, follow the applications, and decentralization is king. So Gavin recently said on X something about dinos, and I wanted to make sure people know that. I said, watch out for dinosaurs. They're not really dinosaurs. Dinos are decentralized in name only. So many networks out there have blockchains that are out there publicly, actually kind of throw out a name. It's probably a decentralized and name only network. But they only have a few people controlling it. If only a few people control a network, it's not decentralized. It's kind of like a company. The top of this got cut off. But anyway, just on decentralization, this is also really important. The Nakamoto efficient just came out, and this is the number of entities that would need to be hacked to is there any way you can pull that down? It doesn't matter. The number of entities that would need to be compromised to take down a network. Polkadot 172. These numbers came out a few days ago, and then you can see the others. And I think that this is really, really important. Ethereum, Bitcoin, Polkadot are really in a class of their own. There are, of course, stable coins, which are in a different class, but so far from what we've seen, it's really just these three. And if you look at these numbers, the Nakamoto coefficient, higher the better, obviously, it's pretty incredible how Polkadot stands out. And this was part of the reason the SEC was so comfortable with our process. So a lot of people say, why didn't you get a no action letter? The no action letter, from the SEC says this is not a security. Gary Gensler came in, and this is what Chrissy and I love to say. I think you came up with this quote. It wasn't personal. It was just politics. Yeah. And politics takes over, and our sense at the time was, and that you were pretty involved in that when we were trying to figure out what is happening here.
Yeah.
And you might want to comment on that because it was just...
Well, it's definitely part of the reason why I joined again Polkadot was because of this careful approach to these regulatory questions, the resiliency of the technology. And it was so frustrating to be in a position where all these boxes had been ticked. Everything had been done the right way, right? In a way that we could all get behind from a philosophical perspective, but also like an ethical perspective. And I am qualified by the New York Bar, and I take these things seriously. And politics, obviously, intrudes, right? It's just part of our world. And it goes to show you how things can change very, very quickly. They changed then very quickly with a no action letter not coming for reasons that will be lost in time, probably. Mm-hmm. And now things have changed remarkably since January 20th with a number of executive orders. Now, I think we all know that geopolitics currently are overtaking the U.S.'s stated regulatory approach and agenda as it relates to digital assets. I think every country in the world right now is considering the T word, and that is impacting everything that we do. But that doesn't mean that innovation is off the agenda for the US. It still is very much there. And actually so many countries around the world since January 20th and since this material change in approach that we see from the US are reconsidering their regulatory stance towards digital assets. India, that's a great example. South Korea, Japan. Every week, the Parity legal team goes live for 30 minutes, and we provide something on X with Jay's help, the Kuz's help, called Regulatory Rewind. We are on our 10th edition that's now live on X. And what we do is we take a quick canter around the globe, and we talk about all the regulatory changes that are upcoming and that the developer community should be aware of. And we have been very, very busy this year, as you can imagine. 30 minutes has not been long enough to talk about all the jurisdictional changes that are happening around the world in light of this very material change that we see in the US. And we don't expect that pace of change to ease up. And so we expect the regulatory rewinds to continue, and we hope to see more positive developments. But again, geopolitics, it's not personal to the digital assets industry or innovation this time. It's a geopolitical discussion of tariffs, which may cause a pause.
Yep. Okay, so I think it's important to look at what the SEC did say and did not say. So there wasn't a no action letter. However, what they did say was 68 other tokens were securities. What they did not say, DOT was the only non-stablecoin token outside of these, at least 50 top tokens, that was not named a security by the SEC. We do not believe this was a mistake. And we believe that we have common understanding even currently today with the SEC.
Absolutely.
So Regulatory Communications 101, you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll take
it.
Okay. Right, so we always say within Parity, or when we're talking about other projects within the ecosystem, that we talk about the technology and not the token. And that is a mantra that we believe in, not only from a regulatory perspective in order to manage some of those issues, but obviously from what Angie was talking about from the very beginning. The technology is so important that that is what we should be majoring on in all of our communications, no matter who they're with, but particularly with regulators. So we also need to be careful in terms of, again, thinking of that functional equivalency and regulatory equivalency, what we choose to say is equivalent. So the DOT token. The DOT token is a utility token. You can do lots of different things with it. You can vote with it. You can actually, hold it and never vote with it if you don't want to. It can also be used to stake, and you get rewards for staking, because staking actually helps preserve the security of the technology. And in some cases, you could look at those rewards you get for being involved in the staking as a yield from the token. But that's not actually right. That is not the equivalency point that you want to be drawing. What you want to see is that by your participation in the technology, by your belief in the technology, that when you actually lock up your tokens for a period of time, you will be getting a reward for your involvement in securing the technology. Now, we can go into staking in another conversation. There are plenty of videos about that. But I think the thing to take away from this discussion is that when finding those equivalent terms, be careful. Make sure it makes sense. Also, there could be interpretation or translation points that really need to be considered when you are talking about technological terms in different languages. And you want to always make sure, I think, and this is something we were very, very careful about, is cutting from the comms terms which might feel easy, but actually aren't accurate and can give a very, very erroneous view of what you're trying to achieve with the technology. So even down to just even emojis that we use, right? Especially in the Web3 world, obviously memes are a big way of communicating. People are communicating on X a lot. You put acronyms in, emojis, but even those emojis we're mindful of, what we're including and what we advise people to include in their communications. So again, it's that level of being careful. Now, Angela, do we want to talk about anything specifically about
the only reason we have this in there is just we spent hours, days, months poring over this sentence because we wanted to get to that crisp delivery of what is actually happening here. Because a lot of people are saying yield and it's historical annual return was 16%, and we were like, oh, that sounds like investing. No. Staking DOT natively provides the function of securing the network. So always start with the function. It provides the function of securing the network, and it allows you to collect DOT tokens for your help. So the idea is that you are actually working for the network and securing the network, and you should get paid for that, not I'm investing money and I'm getting a 16% APY.
And that, again, is, I think, an important philosophical point, and it's about the involvement of individuals with the technology as well. Everybody has a stake. Everybody has a purpose. It's not just something that happens to you. You are involved with it. So, gaming now. This is Angela's baby, and I'll turn it back to her.
Okay, so I'll go through, this is a case study. Hopefully you all can come at 5:30 because I'll go deeper into gaming, into dot play. But just to give a quick case study and why decentralization matters and why regulatory issues matter in gaming. If you go back to Axie Infinity, I don't know who is it, are people are familiar, you're familiar, I'm sure, yeah, with Axie. So Axie was the most popular NFT game in the first wave. I, as an investor, faced a lot of grief for not getting involved in Axie Infinity. And I just couldn't, there were certain aspects of it that were difficult for me to get my head around. And one of them was decentralization, which ended up taking down the network. Now, this at the time was the largest hack in history, 622 million. Unfortunately, North Korea's Lazarus Group, same group as Bybit, same group that has hacked about $6 billion, was responsible for this. But the interesting thing here on decentralization and why it's so important is that the attackers only had to compromise for a 51% attack 5 out of 9 validators. 4 of the 5 were controlled by one company. So to me, that's not decentralized, that's just a company. So Mythical is a company that we invested in early. It was really the only company in Web3 that we felt had this similar to Polkadot's founders, this passion and ethos of decentralization and truly giving back, democratizing value to the players. So just to give a couple of things here, they did, from a regulatory perspective, launch their DAO before the token launched. That's really important because that plays into the decentralization story. Decentralize the DAO and then launch the token so that the token is in many, many holders' hands. There's a 20% rule of thumb in the affiliate rule. If you have less than 20% ownership, then you're not an affiliate, or if multiple entities have less than 20%. So the goal really was to build the Mythos chain on a highly secure infrastructure that would allow them to sleep at night knowing the technology worked and knowing that it was resilient and allow them to focus on games. It's really hard to create video games. And the founders here came from Call of Duty and Electronic Arts and Wizards of the Coast. I mean, some really, really big gaming projects. and they knew gaming, but they didn't know blockchain, and they chose Polkadot. So this at the time was definitely the biggest application in gaming, with 7 million people playing NFL Rivals, the first game. But clearly now, as by the end of this year, they're adding another 9 games. So we're really pretty excited about this. John Linden is the CEO. He ran Call of Duty. Probably people know Call of Duty. And he said, this, I need to worry about my clients and my potential clients and the players. I can't lose sleep at night over whether or not a blockchain is secure, scalable, and truly decentralized. And he's said since then that Polkadot was really the only option in the end. And there were many years where he was and his team were evaluating all the different blockchains. So it's a pretty big statement from somebody who is so established in the gaming market. So coming up soon, I just want to give a couple of highlights. Pudgy Party's coming out. Why does Web3 matter for this? Does anybody know Stumble Guys, the game? So Stumble Guys has garnered over 400 million players. So this is a huge game in Web 2. Tournaments are driving a lot of the activity. The concept of the behavior of trading is important, but the concept of ownership is missing. And so what Web3 in Pudgy Party we think can bring, because these games are in the same genre and look a lot alike, what Pudgy Party can bring is this idea that we will have ownership, and we'll take engagement and tournaments and true ownership to a new level, and provenance.
And this is where I think just to
Oops, sorry.
Why do people care again about gaming? And I think, at least living in London during COVID and during lockdown, and having small children who the only way that they could interact with their classmates and friends was to be on Roblox, or to interact in the virtual rooms that were established by their schools. And this was for a year and a half, pretty intense. There was a time where you couldn't even leave your house for longer than 30 minutes in a day, right? And so this generation, particularly it's Gen Alpha, but the end of Gen Z as well, they are so comfortable with a digital identity, with avatars, with skins, with the concept of digital twins. And I mean, Angie, you have some great examples of like your daughter having certain things in their online. It's like they view the world differently, and they interact with the world differently. And part of that is a function of what they lived through when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, quite formative years of their lives. And they only had that virtual outlet. So again, we have this generation coming up. This is a really important part of their lives. And of course, you don't want it to be the only part of their lives.
Yep.
However, they connect, and we should connect with them as well.
100%. I used to joke that my daughter, she was, I guess, 8 at the time, but I would be on a Zoom at my stand-up desk, and she would walk around the other side of the desk behind my laptop screen and grab my thumb while I was on a call and peek around the corner of my laptop and say, just 5 more Robux. I just want 5 more. So yeah, this was social media in the day, and it still is. So, okay, so FIFA Rivals, real quick, go through this. This is coming this summer. This is going to be a massive game. I said that the NFL Rivals game had 7 million wallets connected, which was by far the biggest application that we'd seen in gaming and Web3 across any chain. If you look at the comparison of when Electronic Arts had FIFA Mobile relative to Electronic Arts Madden, which is their NFL game, it was 20 times the size. I think nobody in this room is going to be surprised by that. A lot of Americans are surprised by the fact that it's 20 times the size. But the interesting thing about FIFA Rivals is it could be more than 20 times the size, because when you look at FIFA Mobile and the Electronic Arts version, which people all over the world played that game, but only a very small percentage of the players got involved in the in-app purchases or the economy. In Web3, we are seeing completely different behavior. People are loving the idea of getting involved in the economy. And Mythical is really leading the charge on this because they're putting mechanics in so that under the hood, blockchain is working, Polkadot is working, Polkadot is securing the network. You know, for players, they're just playing games, they're just having fun. And they're seeing new mechanics that they haven't seen before. And this one is really, really important. This was a breakthrough in video games that we haven't seen, and it happened with Mythical. So this behavior is very typical for gaming. I have 3 items, you have 1 item. I'm gonna show my 3 on the screen, you show your 3 on the screen. We're gonna swap these items. Mythical figured out a way that they could do this in a decentralized way where authenticity and provenance can be proven. This increased activity by 20% when they rolled it out. We haven't seen that in gaming. Gaming has been flatlining for the last several years, so this was a big, big deal. The other thing, going back to what Chrissy said about talk about the tech, not the token, if you're launching an application in a consumer-facing technology, talk about the brand, talk about the games. You don't hear Mythical, pitching the value of the Myth token in the same way that you wouldn't hear the CEO of PayPal pitching the value of PYPL. So it's the brand and what the game, and the games are what is important. And so as a result, it continues to win awards, but this one is one that they're pretty proud of, and we're all pretty proud of in Polkadot. And I'm gonna turn it over to you, Chrissy, to bring us home.
So we wanted to give you some of these real life case studies. I mean, they're from a policymaker's perspective. I mean, really the use cases for blockchain are unlimited, right? It could be used for supply chains. It could be used for ethical commodities. I think that's a really important area. Voting, obviously. I mean, we could keep on going through any number of examples where blockchain provides the truth, really. It's verifiable. You can't change it. One of the places that it's coming up quite a bit is with AI, right? So AI and blockchain, the new power couple is a tagline you might see. And that's because blockchain theoretically could provide the guardrails to deal with copyright issues, IP issues, any number of issues. Also, AI can get a form of amnesia or dementia, as they call it, because it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And, it's the same information in, bad stuff in, bad stuff out. You can't verify it. And all of these things are being discussed. And I wouldn't say that there is a killer app or killer use case right now related to AI and blockchain, but certainly lots of people are talking about it, looking into it. And these are examples which, if we had more time, we could go through in more detail, because I think also issues come up when you start to think about, from a policymaker's perspective in particular, what is available to the public? What is open source? What do people have access to in terms of the underlying technology? Again, there's many people in Web3 who believe that everything should be open source, everything should be available. But then you start to see disagreements. And a great example of a disagreement is the OpenAI Elon Musk discussion. And Elon Musk helped set up OpenAI as an open source platform, right? And it has now been taken to something that is closed, away from those open source beginnings. And that is one of the disagreeing points that you see, or points of disagreement, I should say, between Sam Altman and Elon Musk. And that's actually really important from a public policy perspective, because that's all about a company making profit. And how is that going to be taxed? Do you want these AI models to be purely driven, or do you want them to be accessible to everyone? Do you want to know what the learning models are that are being used in order to produce the data? Do you want to have any kind of oversight over these things? And we're getting into a slightly different area, which again, it's not necessarily covered by this presentation, but the key is good regulation. And the key, I think, for regulators is to take the time, like y'all are doing, to understand the technology, to meet with people who are building the technology, to understand both how it can benefit governing, but also can benefit the people who you are governing themselves, right? So it can go both ways. And then also the society that you are working towards in this new digital world, because some of these points can have such far-reaching consequences.
Before you finish, I want to add one example of this, which is in gaming. You know, as people care more and more about the digital assets that they're purchasing in these, you know, metaverse spaces like you're building, I feel like there's a, you know, there's a concern around authenticity. AI pours gasoline on that fire. We are going to see an explosion of inauthenticity. And from a regulatory perspective, I think you're starting to hear people in gaming and entertainment who care about IP rights talk about this idea of, do we need some sort of technology that allows us to click in to find out if this is actually authentic, to find out what the provenance is? What technology could we possibly use? Blockchain could be the one. So that's, you know, a hot topic right now.
Very hot topic.
Yeah.
And I think taking the time to get down to that fundamental level is essential. And it's essential for also us within the industry to make sure that we are talking about it in a really accessible way, which is something that we're working on, and would love your feedback on how we can do that better, what venues we should be doing those in, and how we should be discussing it with people, because the onus is also on us to make this relatable, to help flesh out the use cases. Because in the end, what we want to give people is certainty. And that certainty in all aspects of our lives. But if you look at this purely from an economic perspective, those jurisdictions that provide certainty to builders will attract those builders to their jurisdictions. That will then again bring jobs for people in that jurisdiction. Because what is very difficult right now is if you are putting together a building, you're building your budget, and you're trying to assign to those 5 categories that I introduced, just a dollar figure or a pound figure, or, you know, whatever currency you're thinking about. Because that's what you need as a business owner, as a founder. You need to have a budget, and you need to assign a value there. How do you assign a value to that if you don't know what your tax rate is going to be? If you don't know how much it's going to cost to comply with whatever law might be in place, when you don't know how much it's going to cost to set up a company, you're going to go to the places who provide you with that certainty. Because, hey, maybe the tax rate is 30%, but at least that's better than not knowing what it is at all, right? It might be high, but at least you can build that into your budget. So there's some practicalities there that drive adoption, that drive business. And in the end, what we're trying to promote, again, is the technology, not the token, and truth. And I think that's what Polkadot is about. And we want to see good regulation. And there are a lot of different ways we can do that. And we want to work with y'all to make sure that that happens. And we can do that in these ways. And we try to keep up as much as we can. So that is our presentation for the day, unless Angie wants to bring up anything else.
Nope, I think that wraps it up.
Thank you.
Did good.